There's a millennial individual sitting in their car in a parking lot after a difficult conversation, and they are fine. They were fine during the conversation, which involved a friend in crisis who needed someone to stay on the phone for 2 hours. They were fine at work earlier, where a colleague had a difficult situation that required them to absorb some emotional weight in addition to their own workload. They were fine when their family member sent a message asking for advice about something complicated, and they replied with the full, careful response that the question deserved, even though they were in the middle of something else. They've been fine for so long in so many situations that the fineness has become the baseline expectation. There's in everyone else's. The car is quiet. There is no one in it who needs anything from them. And the millennial individual sits in the quiet of the parking lot and feels a specific tiredness that is not about sleep and does not know quite how to name it, because it has been so long since anyone asked how they were doing that they have partly stopped knowing the answer. The role of the strong one is not assigned through a single conversation or a dramatic event. It accretes. It builds through 100 small moments in which the millennial individual was capable and others were not, or appeared not to be, and the natural gravity of those moments pulled them toward the position of the person who handles things. They handled things well. The handling was noticed. More things were brought to them to handle. The role settled around them gradually, the way roles do, until it was no longer a thing they were doing, but a thing they were. The millennial individual did not audition for this role. In many cases, they walked into it through qualities that are genuinely theirs: competence, reliability, the specific capacity to remain regulated when others are not, the ability to absorb difficulty without visibly falling apart. These are real capabilities. They are not performance, but they were observed and they were useful. And usefulness has a way of becoming expectation, and expectation has a way of becoming identity, and identity has a way of becoming a room with no visible exit. There is a psychological term that describes one version of what the millennial individual is carrying, and it is worth introducing because it names something that often goes unnamed. Emotional labor is a concept developed by the sociologist Arlie Hochschild in her 1983 book, The Managed Heart, originally in the context of service workers who were required to manage their own emotional states as a condition of their employment. The concept has since expanded in both research and popular use to describe the broader work of managing one's own emotions in the service of others, the effort of staying calm when a person near you is not calm, of providing the regulated response that the other person cannot currently provide for themselves, of being the emotional anchor in a system that needs one. Emotional labor is invisible in the way that most care work is invisible. It does not produce a document or a deliverable. It does not appear on a performance review, and it does not generate the kind of social acknowledgement that visible achievement generates. But it is work. In the full sense that matters, it consumes real cognitive and physiological resources. It requires sustained effort, and it has measurable costs when the output exceeds what the person providing it can sustainably afford. The millennial individual in the parking lot has been doing this work largely unacknowledged for years. The friends who call in crisis are not counting the calls. The family members who bring the complicated situations are not tracking the load. The colleagues who take the absorbing are not performing the accounting. They are simply available to what the millennial individual has made available, which is their regulated presence, consistently and on demand, in the service of everyone else's difficulty. There is a specific childhood architecture that often underlies the adult strong one role, and it is worth tracing because the adult pattern rarely arrives without a history. Many millennial individuals who occupy this role grew up in households where adult emotions were poorly regulated, where financial or emotional stress produced an environment in which the child learned to read the room, manage their response, and become whatever the household needed them to be in order to maintain some stability. Some learned to become invisible, to take up less space, to make no demands. Others learned to become competent, capable, and reliable, to be the thing the adult could lean on rather than the thing the adult needed to support. The child who becomes the family's emotional regulator, who is praised for their maturity, rewarded for their reliability, and implicitly taught that their needs are secondary to the needs of the system, is learning something that will serve them in some ways and cost them in others for the rest of their life. They are learning that their value is tied to their usefulness to others. They are learning that being needed is more reliable than being known. They are learning that the position of the strong one is a form of safety, because the strong one is indispensable, and the indispensable person is not abandoned. This is not a conscious calculation. The child does not decide to become the strong one. They discover, through experience, that it works, and they build their identity around what works. The adult version of this identity produces a very specific set of patterns that the millennial individual usually does not identify as patterns, because they have been in place for so long they appear to be simply personality. There is the automatic orientation toward others in any room. The millennial individual enters a social situation, and within within a few minutes has made an unconscious assessment of who needs what, who is nervous, who is overwhelmed, who is in a difficult patch, and has begun, without deciding to position themselves to be useful to those people. This is not altruism in the pure sense. It is a deeply ingrained navigation strategy that happens faster than any deliberate choice. There is the discomfort with being on the receiving end. When someone asks how they are and actually waits for the answer, the millennial individual feels a specific and uncomfortable exposure. The exposure of having needs of their own, which they have learned to treat as a secondary concern, now being primary in someone else's attention. The discomfort often produces a deflection. Fine, and you? The question returns to the other person before the millennial individual has answered it, because the position of the person being attended to is genuinely unfamiliar and more than a little uncomfortable. There is the specific resentment that arrives without anyone having done anything obviously wrong. The millennial individual finds themselves irritated at a friend who called with a problem, not because the call was unreasonable, but because the call represents the 300th deposit in an account that has been withdrawing for years without anyone noticing. The irritation has no clean referent. It is the accumulated cost of being available, expressed as a feeling that makes the millennial individual feel like a bad person, which adds another layer to the load. There's also a specific way the strong one role interacts with the millennial individual's generation's relationship to help seeking, and it produces an almost perfectly closed loop. The millennial individual occupies the strong one position not only because of their individual history, but because their generation was formed in conditions that placed a high premium on self-sufficiency. The 2008 recession and its cultural aftermath produced a generation of professionals who learned that asking for help was a form of vulnerability that professional environments did not reward, and that the person who could manage their own difficulties without importing them into shared spaces was the person who kept their position. Self-sufficiency was survival. Managing one's own emotional state was basic professional competence. This training merged with the strong one identity to produce a person who is not only unwilling to ask for help, but who has structural difficulty identifying that they need it. The position of person who provides emotional regulation is so established that the millennial individual's own nervous system treats being in the absorbing position as the default condition rather than as an expenditure. They are not aware of being tired because tired is the water they swim in. They are not aware of carrying extra weight because they have never experienced the alternative. The loop closes when the millennial individual, having given more than they have received for years, begins to feel the strain without being able to locate its source, and then gives more, because giving is what they know how to do in the presence of any discomfort, including their own. The exhaustion of the strong one is not resolved through a dramatic shift in personality, and it is not resolved by refusing to be available to the people who need them, which is the advice that sounds sensible and lands as both impractical and not quite right. The millennial individual does not want to become unavailable. The caring is genuine. The availability is in many cases a real expression of real love. The problem is not the caring. It is the one-directionality of it and the invisibility of the labor, and the absence of anything that flows back in the direction of the person providing it. What is available at the level of intervention that is both honest and sustainable is something more specific. It is the practice of occasionally naming the cost, not performing collapse, not turning the dynamic dramatically around, but simply introducing into the millennial individual's existing relationships an occasional, honest account of what is happening on their side of the equation. The 2-hour phone call that cost something, the absorbing at work that was real work, the family complexity that landed and required something to carry it. These costs, named rather than managed away, give the other people in the millennial individual's life the opportunity to respond, which most of them, if given the opportunity, will. The strong one does not have to stop being strong. They have to occasionally allow being strong to have a visible cost. That cost, seen and acknowledged, is the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one in which the millennial individual is known rather than only useful, present rather than only available, a person rather than a function. There's something worth saying about the fear underneath the resistance to naming the cost. The millennial individual who has built their identity around being reliable almost always carries a specific and rarely examined fear. If I stop being the strong one, I will not be needed, and if I am not needed, I will not be kept. The indispensability is not only habit, it is a form of security. The person who handles everything cannot be disposed of because no one else is handling it. This fear was installed early, in the household or environment where the strong one role first proved its value. Naming the cost feels dangerous because it seems to suggest the millennial individual is struggling, which is the thing the role was always constructed to never suggest. The fear says, if they see that I am tired, they will find someone who is not. The fear is wrong about most of the people in the millennial individual's life, who would in most cases receive the naming of cost as an invitation to closeness rather rather than a demonstration of weakness. But the fear has rarely been tested because the experiment has rarely been run. The millennial individual in the car in the parking lot is not failing at self-care. They are not insufficiently boundaried. They are a person of genuine capability who has spent years making that capability available to everyone around them without the same availability being offered. In return, not because the people around them are selfish, but because the strong one role, well played, makes the need invisible. Nobody asks because nobody can see. Nobody can see because the millennial individual has become very good at not showing. The tiredness in the parking lot is real. It deserves to be real. It is the accumulated cost of years of genuine emotional work that was never entered into anyone's accounting, including the millennial individual's own. The car is quiet, the next call will come. Before it does, it is enough to simply be in the quiet for a moment. Without managing it, without being fine, without having any particular answer to how they are, just tired in a car, in a parking lot, which is what being honest looks like today. Thanks for watching. If this felt familiar, leave a comment. And the next time someone asks how you are doing, actually, genuinely asks, consider giving them a slightly more honest answer than fine.